For those attending online, please make sure you've typed your name and that name reflects your first and last name and your representation. We ask those intending to speak use the raise hand button to ask a question or comment on an agenda item. If you have any technical questions, you can direct them to staff in the chat box. As a reminder to members and alternates here in person, please press the unmute button at the bottom of your mic stand and make sure the light on your microphone is on when you are prepared to speak, and speak directly into the microphone so your voice will amplify. I'm not sure if mine is every time, but sometimes I can hear it. Please announce your name and representation when asking a question or making a comment for the record. During the business agenda, TAC members and alternates can speak or ask questions. Members of the public may only speak during the public comment period. DRCOG is sending around the sign-in sheet, so I ask that you please sign in. And also ask at this time, will TAC members and alternates please introduce themselves in person? Why don't we start with the far corner?
Christina Lane, Jefferson County.
Mike Whitaker, Jeffco, Lakewood.
Kelly Van Bergen, City of Arvada.
Colin Roloff, Clear Creek County.
Tim Kotzer, Arapahoe County.
I'm Worker Braddock, Arapahoe County, City of Aurora.
Michelle Riccio, Adams County.
Dinta Glamariam, Adams County, City of North Glen.
Anna Hahn, Adams County, City of Commerce City.
Jessica Mickelbus, Colorado Department of Transportation, Region 1.
Try that again. There we go. Jacob Rieger, DRCOG staff.
Justin Begley, City County of Denver.
Alvin Bigot Sanchez, DRCOG staff.
Frank Bruno, via Mobility Services, non-RTD special interest.
Rocky McSalka, Jefferson County, City of Wheat Ridge.
Sakata, Environmental Special Interest.
Jim Houston, CEDAR Region 4.
Kira Ruman Moore, Regional Air Quality Council.
Krista Gahan, CDOT Division of Transportation Development.
Chris Hudson, Douglas County, Town of Parker.
Zeke Lynch, Douglas County. Larry Nemos, Douglas County, City of Castle Pines.
Jansen, City of Boulder.
Alex Hydrate, Boulder County.
Miguel Aguilar, Southwest Weld County, Town of Erie.
Chris Quinn, RTD.
Josh Schwank, DRCOG staff.
Brent Soderlin, Littleton, Arapahoe County.
David Kretzinger, City and County of Denver.
Brody Ayers, Aviation Special Interest Seat.
Carson Priest, TDM Special Interest Seat.
And then I do have a couple announcements related to membership just for the benefit of the order. These are a couple of goodbyes to members who were on TAC or in the region. So for those who weren't aware, Brian Weimer's last day was March 13th with the county. So he served 42 years, missed an announcement at the last TAC meeting, but want to congratulate him on his retirement and next steps. And then the second departure will be Bill Soroy with RTD. So his final day will be April 1 and moving out west to California. So I want to thank both of those individuals for participating in the region's transportation system. And those are my announcements, Chair.
For many of us, two folks that you all have probably worked with quite a bit, and if you haven't, really big losses, but good for both of them on their next steps. So we'll miss them. So moving on in the agenda, we're on to public comments. And we'll now open the meeting for public comments. So public comments are limited to 3 minutes each. If you've joined by Zoom, we ask that you please raise your hand by pressing the raise hand button. We will call on you to begin speaking. If you joined by phone, please raise your virtual hand by pressing *9. We'll call on you by the last 3 digits of your phone number. Staff will unmute you, and then you'll need to unmute yourself by pressing *6 on your phone. We'll have 3 minutes to speak, after which we will ask you to wrap up and your line will be muted. As a reminder, after the public comment period, only TAC members and alternates will participate in the discussion regarding each agenda item.
Thank you, Chair. I do not see any hands raised online or in person at this time.
Thank you. So moving on into the agenda, we will see, at this time, we'll move on to the TAC meeting summary from February 23rd, 2026. Attachment A in the agenda. Any discussion, corrections, or questions about that TAC meeting summary from the committee? Seeing none, the minutes will stand approved and move on to the next item. Have several action items in this agenda, so appreciate folks sticking with us through here. I see 5 action items. So we'll move into the first item, which is the 2026 to 2029 Transportation Improvement Program amendments, which is attachment B in your. We have Josh Schwenk, Senior Planner with the Programming and Project Delivery Team, who's going to present this item.
All right, thank you, Chair. We do have several amendments to the Transportation Improvement Program proposed for you this afternoon. The first would be a change to the Colorado 119 project between Boulder and Longmont. CDOT Region 4 is looking to add $15 million in state faster safety funding to that project. The next would be an addition of $10,109,000 in funding to the Clean Transit Enterprise project, and the addition of 7 new pool projects to relate the recent project awards for the Clean Transit Enterprise. And then we have a transfer of funding between projects. CDOT Region 1 is looking to move $7 million from the surface treatment pool to the I-270 project. Additionally, they are transferring funding between years on the 270 project and adding future funding in the amount of $118 million to that project as well. Happy to answer any questions committee members may have about any of these projects. Otherwise, I do have a proposed motion available for you in your packet.
Thank you, Josh. Does anybody have any questions or comments? And remember to announce your name and representation if you're going to make a comment for the record. If not, we'd now entertain a motion and a second for approval of this agenda item. Anybody like to make a motion? Tom?
I make a motion to recommend to the MARTAC the attached project amendments to the 2026 to 2029 TIP.
Whitaker, Jeffco, I'll second.
Any further discussion on this item? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed by no? Any abstentions? Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
And coming up for the next action item, we have Travis Noon, manager of the AAA Business Operations Team, who will present this item.
All right. Thank you, Chair. For those of you that don't know me, I am Travis Noon. I'm the manager of business operations for our area agency on aging here at DRCOG. So I oversee the funding that comes through the AAA, but I also manage the Section 5310 program and the Human Services Transportation Set Aside. So what I have for you here today is the recommended projects for fiscal year 2027. Just a quick reminder on what these funds are for. So DRCOG is the designated recipient of Federal Transit Administration Section 5310 funding for the Denver Aurora urbanized area. That funding provides approximately $3 million a year for specialized transit projects, capital, operating and mobility management that benefit older adults and individuals with disabilities. In addition, as part of the 2024-2027 TIP, DRCOG's board set aside $8 million or $2 million annually for human services transportation that was intended to complement the Federal Transit Administration program, as well as the Older Americans Act and state funding for senior services funds for transportation that come through DRCOG. So we typically release calls for projects for both of these projects, these funding sources together, because they do complement each other and kind of consider it as one pot of funding here. So getting into the call, like I said, we do release yearly calls for projects. So this call was released in November 2025 and closed in January of 2026. We received proposals from 11 organizations requesting about $5.8 million. And there is approximately $5.2 million available between these two sources of funding, with carryover funding from prior years for the period of July 1, 2026 through June 30th, 2027. All of these applications are given to an external stakeholder panel to review and make the recommendations that are presented for you here today. Those recommendations are in your packet with a little bit more detail than what is on the screen here, but these are the recommended projects. So you'll notice, I'll kind of walk through a little bit of them here, but there's some software development projects, one for DRCOG's Ride Alliance Trip Exchange Hub, and for a little help, some app development for a little help. There's ongoing operating and mobility management projects for Via Mobility Services, a little help, Lakewood, Dr. Mac, which is Colorado Nonprofit Development Center, Douglas County, as well as DRCOG's AAA transportation services. And there's also, on the next screen here, most of it is going to be your capital projects. So there's quite a lot of capital replacement vehicles that are being awarded as well out to various organizations to continue operations. There were two projects that did not get funding here. One was for Colorado Nonprofit Development Center, Dr. Mac. They submitted a mobility management project to the Human Services Transportation Set-Aside funding. The Human Services Transportation Set-Aside has undergone some funding changes over the years, and recently, in prior years, we've been able to kind of work creatively to make it as flexible as possible, but with the cuts to the multimodal options fund money at the state level, we've had to kind of settle back into it being CMAQ funding and we were told that mobility management is not eligible for CMAQ funding going forward. So that was not recommended for funding. They are going to get 5310 funding for their ongoing mobility management, though. The other project that wasn't recommended for funding was Via Mobility Services submitted a project to pave their parking lot in Denver. Really, that funding was recommended to go to higher scoring capital projects and continue ongoing funding to operating mobility management projects there. I'm happy to answer any questions you all have, but I also have a recommended motion for the committee to have any questions.
Thank you, Travis. Any questions for Travis on this item? Yes, Chris.
Travis, this is Chris Hudson with the town of Parker. Question for you, did you have to do any haircuts to your magic $5.2 million number, or was it everything just lined up?
There wasn't very many cuts off of other projects. I think there was a 2% cut from some of the operating and mobility management projects from the requested amounts. So other than that, you'll notice some of the requested capital was less than, and a lot of that was just aligning it with what the actual costs were. So some folks included operating costs in with the request for replacing vehicles, which is not eligible. It's just the cost of the vehicle. And so those are just lining up to the vehicle.
Thank you.
If there are no other comments, I'd like to make a motion. This is Zeke Lynch, Douglas County. I move to recommend to the RTC the Sorry, I just lost my notes. That's classic. I recommend to the RTC, the Federal Transit Administration, Section 5310, and Human Services Transportation Set-Aside projects for the period beginning July 1st, 2026 and ending June 30th, 7, as recommended by the review panel.
I second. David Kretzinger with City and County of Denver.
Thank you. Committee, any further discussion?
I will be abstaining since we're on the list. Thank you.
Anything else?
So that's the second meeting where we've had some abstentions. Can you give us some guidance as far as whether we should or should not vote for projects that we also have a project on this list?
Do you have any easier questions? So I don't know if we have formal policy on this, but practice in this committee over the years has been on specific project funding requests where you are a potential recipient of those dollars. Typically, those folks have chosen to abstain. I'm not even sure that we require that. That has been the practice, though, as opposed to like just the overall TIP when we make TIP funding allocations, project selections. I think that's a little bit different. Or I was asked a question earlier about an upcoming item that is not a financial transaction, and advise that person that because there isn't a financial aspect, I didn't see any reason to abstain from voting. So I think that's the guidance I could give you.
Thank you. So recognizing that explanation, do I need to withdraw my motion?
And to me, I'm not Robert's Rules of Order, but I think you can certainly make the motion. I don't see an issue with that.
So if I follow, we still have a motion and a second, and one last or another call for any other comments or questions. Seeing none, so all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, saying no. And any abstentions?
Sequence, Douglas County.
I believe we had Frank as well from earlier. Hey, thank you, Travis. We're moving on to number 6 in the agenda, an action item for the livable centers set aside, project recommendations. You'll find that as attachment D. We have Caitlin Service, Program Manager for the Regional Planning Team, who will present this item.
Hi, thank you. I'm Caitlin Service. I'm the Program Manager of Regional Planning at DRCOG, and happy to be here today to talk about the Livable Centers Small Area Planning Set Aside. Livable Centers is a technical assistance program that DRCOG administers. It's identified as a set aside in the 2024 to 27 Transportation Improvement Program for the TIP. So there's $2.5 million over that 4-year TIP period. In this funding cycle, we had $835,000 available, and the funding is used to hire consultant services for planning and analysis that supports centers and nodes along a multimodal transportation systems. And Livable Centers is one of the set-asides that were included in the set-aside policy that the board adopted in March of 2023. Program goals are taken directly from MetroVision, which is the Denver region's long-range plan for growth and development. And they are to increase housing and employment in centers, support multimodal enhancements in transit to connect centers, promote investment and reinvestment in existing communities, increase diverse housing accessible by multimodal transportation, improving access to and from centers, and then improving access to opportunity for all ages, abilities, and incomes. We accepted letters of interest for this round in November and October of last year, and we did receive 10 proposed projects that asked for $2.1 million. They were evaluated based on the evaluation criteria that's included in the board-adopted TIP set-aside policy, and based on those scores and the available funding, there are 3 projects that are recommended to move forward for funding, and they're up here on the screen and also in your packet. This is an action item on your agenda today. And there's a recommended motion up here on the screen. I'm also happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Caitlin. Have an opportunity for the committee to ask questions or share any comments. Like you did a great job. No questions or comments. Ask for a motion from the committee.
This is Frank Bruno, so moved.
Second.
Any other comments or questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed saying no. Any abstentions?
Christina Lane, Jefferson County.
Noted. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Moving into number 7, our 4th action item. Josh Schwenk, Senior Planner, will be presenting 2024 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Program Set Aside Policy Document Amendment. That's attachment E. Josh is with the Program and Project Delivery Team, and he will present this item.
All right, thank you, Chair. Hello again, everyone. So we've just heard project selections from 2 of our set-asides associated with our Transportation Improvement Program. Now we're going to be discussing sort of the background policies that shape those set-asides. So we do have a policy document that governs all of the set-asides through our Transportation Improvement Program, which we do update by amendment occasionally. And we are bringing some changes to you today just based on lessons learned as some of those programs have finished calls for projects and want to refine their programs. So included within your packet is a redlined version of the full document. I think it may have actually come through as green lines, but it shows all of the changes being proposed, but just some high-level changes. The policy is being sort of extended by 1 year. So in November 2025, the board did vote to extend all of our set-aside programs by 1 year to include fiscal year 2028 funds. So that is being noted within this policy. The Transportation Demand Management set-aside is including references to their new annual work plan for Way to Go and including some connections between themes within their calls for projects and that work plan, as well as reflecting the fact that contracting for those projects is now handled through DRCOG, so making that contracting process a little bit clearer. We do also have some updates to the Regional Transportation Operations and Technology set-aside eligibility and requirements for submitting, as well as to scoring for both the innovative mobility and community-based transportation planning set-asides. We've also just included some general fixing typos, clarifications, and general text revisions throughout the document. So happy to answer any questions folks may have about any of those changes. Otherwise, again, I do have a proposed motion available for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Opening it up to committee for comments and questions. I see Alex have his hand up.
Alex Hedright, Boulder County. A question about the revised requirements for the Regional Transportation Operations and Technology set-aside. Do those require projects funded through the set-aside to be compatible with transit or snowplow signal priority?
I believe the requirement is if they are including transit signal priority, any projects would need to be compatible with the regional Intelligent Transportation Systems Architecture, the ITS architecture. I don't know specifically how TSP is addressed in that architecture at the moment. I apologize. I can find that out and let you know.
Zeke.
Zeke Lynch, Douglas County. I guess I just asked the question, how receptive are you at this point for proposed revisions from this body?
If there are revisions, we can make those. These were just brought by the set-aside managers themselves based on sort of lessons learned from those calls for projects. But if the committee does have additional changes, we can potentially incorporate those for the RTC and board for their actions. But we were bringing it as an action item today. So depending on the scale of the revision, I think we could potentially be open to that.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll just propose the revision. You could tell me if you're receptive to it or not.
Sure.
So looking at page 24, and it's in regards to the RTNO funding as well, you've added to the eligible project locations a statement that it's required to be on roadway segments with an average traffic signal spacing of no more than 1 mile. And what that causes concern for me, particularly in our jurisdiction, is we've done a really good job with access management. So we have some segments of the regional roadway network that don't have less than half-mile spacing of signals, so we would not qualify for funding. And specifically, I looked at some corridors in kind of South Metro, so things like Santa Fe, Arapahoe Road, Bellevue also have more than half-mile spacing, so they would also not qualify for RTNO funding. And that, I think, excludes a lot of great projects within the region, and specifically some that were just mentioned, like transit signal priority. You may want to do transit signal priority at a single, maybe more isolated signal, but you wouldn't be able to access this funding to do so. So I would propose that we strike that sentence.
Okay. See if there's any comments from Jacob or Alvin, but I'm open to that, or we can relay that back to Greg McKinnon, who is the manager for that set aside, and see if he has any concerns.
So I'm actually texting Greg to see if we can get him to weigh on. That's a little bit beyond our expertise. So appreciate you raising the issue. Let's keep going with the conversation and see if we can circle back in this item.
I just want to note in the proposed language, it says no more than 1/2 mile, not 1 mile. So I don't know if that makes your comment moot or.
It doesn't. I should have stated 1/2 mile. And I checked some other design criteria of neighboring agencies as well. And that 1/2 mile spacing is, like DRCOG has the same spacing requirements for signals that we do.
Buy you some time while you're waiting for your question. I'm just curious, 2 questions. On page 15, we struck out Federal Highway Administration, that the review panel will also include external stakeholders and subject matter experts. I'm just curious, no federal partners?
So we actually heard from the Federal Highway Administration that they are forbidden from participating in project selection when federal funds are involved. So they will still be consulted on project eligibility, but they cannot participate in the actual selection panels.
Okay, that's kind of what I assumed. Thank you. Then also a question on the, I think it's page 19, post-award process, and you said it was based on lessons learned, but kind of following through that section, CDOT is crossed out in several different spots. So just wondering if it was kind of based on the review process and notification and working with local agencies on, project delays and things like that, if it was better practice to have DRCOG lead the way, or what the thought was around those strikes.
I don't recall the exact page number. I'm thinking that might be the TDM set aside.
No, it's page 9. Well, the section is post-award process. Starts on page 19 and then it flows over to page 20 and talks about the delay section.
Okay. So that section is included within each of the set-asides. I believe that one is specific to the TDM set-aside, and because they've sort of internalized that contracting process, they are going to be the ones sort of leading up the delays review for all of those projects that are contracted through them. For the other set-asides that remain contracted through CDOT, that would remain the same process that we would work with CDOT for.
Gotcha. Thank you. Buy you enough time?
A little bit.
Yes, I see Jane's hand up. Yep.
Hi. Thanks for the presentation and sharing the redlined draft. I have a question about the innovative mobility set aside. So I noticed that in the program purpose, demonstrations and pilots are struck out of that, and just curious as to the rationale for that.
I think that comes back to sort of our ability to what we can deliver. So that funding does kind of flow through DRCOG rather than being awarded out to local agencies. So it is a little bit difficult for DRCOG to then provide those pilots. We are sort of continuing to work with like data pilots and things like that with local agencies, but actually providing sort of a mobility on demand pilot or something like that is a bit outside the scope of what we're able to provide.
Yeah, and I think as well, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's a little bit of a federal funding source semantics issue. The word pilot in particular is a little bit of a loaded word. So it's not that we can't do new things, it's that we got to be careful what we actually call and fund as a pilot.
That is correct.
Thanks. I'll buy you a little bit more time here too. To Jessica's point about contracting with CDOT and DRCOG, I think all of us in the TDM space thank DRCOG for taking on the role of being willing to take on that contracting. Federally, we're a very small fish in a big ocean most of the time, so it makes a lot more sense for us to be working directly with DRCOG. And I also just want to publicly applaud your effort in tying it directly to the Way to Go annual plan. I'm excited for that work to take place and be a little bit more formal in the years moving forward for TDM.
Any other questions as of right now? I can see Jacob is reviewing something. He might be ready, but if there's any other comments or questions, come.
All right, looks like my time's up. Greg is actually working remotely today. I was trying to get him to join the meeting to see if he could weigh in directly. Oh, actually, he says he's on, but let me start with what he sent us to answer the question about signal spacing. It's something stemming from the initial TSSIP. The benefits of signal timing coordination for greater spacing than 1/2 mile is significantly diminished. The platoons are dispersed. In essence, this focuses on urban signal timing coordination and not rural roads with isolated signals. That said, Josh, if Greg is on, are we able to kind of have him chime in directly? Sorry, and thank you.
Okay, it took me forever. I'm so sorry. It took me forever to get the audio button connected. So yeah, what you read from my text that I had just sent would be where I start. I don't know what the specific questions were, and I was hoping that was addressing them. Can no one hear me?
Yeah, we sure can, Greg.
Oh, okay.
Zeke Lynch, Douglas County. I guess I just asked the question, Greg, if we could strike that particular sentence from the RTNO requirements for the location. And the reason is I think that program is meant to be more than just signal timing. It's meant to be technology within our signal system, which could be transit signal priority, or it could be GPS technology for emergency vehicles. It could be a lot of other things, pedestrian detection at at crossings. It could be a lot of things. So I think all of our signals could benefit from access to that funding, and all the corridors that are on the regional network should qualify, in my opinion.
Yes, I see what you're saying about the additional things that was very specifically related to coordination. I think that we would still need to be able to evaluate that, where we have a strong or high density of signals, that would have a higher importance to the program than a lower density of signals because, investing in transit signal priority on a rural road won't be as beneficial as keeping a coordination with the signals in a dense area.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I guess I wouldn't describe Highlands Ranch Parkway as a rural road. And I wouldn't describe some of the other corridors in the South Metro area as rural roads. I guess if this sentence is to persist, I'll have to be a no on this item.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I'm okay with taking it out. I'm just was suggesting that as we work through the projects that are submitted, that we would be able to account for the differences between the density of signals and what the expected benefits are going to be.
So perhaps, Greg, would you be receptive to including language such that it doesn't exclude potential projects, but rather is factored into the prioritization of projects through the selection process? That would be, I think, more comfortable to me.
Yes, that would be my intention.
Do you have specific language you would mind proposing as an actual sort of wordsmithing amendment?
I actually only came prepared just to strike it. So if Greg has some, and it doesn't fit in the section we're talking about either because it's eligibility projects by location. So the prioritization discussion perhaps needs to occur elsewhere in the document.
That's a good point.
Okay, so your proposal would be to delete. Josh, do you mind bringing up that page
24? Or
1 second.
And Greg, if you can hear me while Josh is doing that, can you think about, do we need to add something to a different section to incorporate what you and Zeke are sort of talking about, factoring that into prioritization or evaluation of projects? Do we actually need those words somewhere?
Well, again, that's a good question because I think that in our evaluation process, where we talk about the impacts and the benefits, that the statements made in the applications could be weighed against each other. I think it would be self-evident that the benefits are going to be greater for a higher density signalized corridor. So we may not have to say that specifically, and just rely on the scoring process to allow that to happen.
Okay. Thank you for that, Greg. So Zeke, your proposed amendment, as I understand, would be on that paragraph, directly benefit the DRCOG regional roadway system, period.
That is correct. Thank you.
Okay. All right. And while we have Greg, Alex, do you want to ask your question again, just to make sure we gave you the right answer?
Thanks. This is Alex Scheider with Boulder County. I'm wondering if there's anything in the eligibility for the RTOT set aside that requires projects funded to be transit signal and snowplow signal priority capable.
It's very specific on the transit signal priority because that's one of the highest priority initiatives identified in the Regional Transportation Operations and Technology Strategic Plan. In terms of snow plows, no, it doesn't say anything about that.
But TSP is included through the plan?
Yeah, the plan is identified. There's the three levels of priority, and it's in the highest highest set of initiatives is improving transit signal priority deployment across the region.
Thank you.
Good discussion. I follow most of it, but I definitely captured the proposed amendment language, so we're on the right track. Any other comments or questions for what Josh is presenting? Seeing no follow-up comments or questions, I am going to ask from the committee for a motion on what's been presented, considering the amendment language as well. Looking your way.
Zeke Lynch, Douglas County again. I move to recommend to the RTC the attached amendments to the policy for the 24 to 27 Transportation Improvement Program set-aside programs document with the following modification. I propose striking the part of the sentence on page 24 under the Regional Transportation Operations and Technology Set-Aside Eligible Projects location heading that reads, quote, on roadway segments with an average traffic signal spacing of no more than 1/2 mile, close quote.
Worker Braddock, Arapahoe County, City of Aurora, second.
Question. Any further discussion? Item. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed by saying no. Any abstentions? Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
We were at our last action item, 5 of 5. Jacob Rieger, our Division Director of Transportation Planning and Operations, will present the Metropolitan Planning Organization Boundary Expansion, attachment F in your packet.
Great, thank you, Chair Begley. Good afternoon, everyone. You just heard from me on this last month, so I was going to do a 50-slide PowerPoint, and then I decided not to do a PowerPoint at all. Because again, you just heard this, and as a reminder from last month, what we talked about was the notion that after each decennial census, I'm actually going to scroll down to the map. Down here, after each decennial census, we are required under federal law to review what's known as our MPO boundary, our Metropolitan Planning Area Boundary. And we do that specifically under federal law to account for the areas that are urbanized or expected to become urbanized over the next 20 years. But we also have the opportunity under federal law to do more than that and to actually look at areas with strong sort of mobility, economic development, housing, aging, sort of other linkages in terms of relationships, with our existing sort of, urban area or our existing MPO planning area. So as I articulated last month, we've been having conversations with folks in Clear Creek County and Gilpin County, meaning both counties themselves as well as their local governments, exploring the potential of bringing the geography of both counties, as you can see in blue, into our metropolitan planning area, into our MPO, which you can see in orange. As a reminder, they're already members of DRCOG. They're already in our state-defined transportation planning region, the Greater Denver TPR. They're already part of our area agency on aging. They're already part of our economic development work. They're part of our housing work. So this is really strengthening existing relationships, but in a way that would help kind of streamline and better coordinate from the transportation planning perspective. So we think that this is a pretty kind of high win strategy at a pretty low cost. So we are bringing this to you today for action. The process here would be if you all recommend approval, RTC and our board approves, we would write a letter to the governor through CDOT presenting some required documentation about the planning process that we went through, some technical GIS files documentation. Ultimately, the governor makes the determination under federal law of changing the MPO boundary and then notifies the Federal Highway and the Federal Transit Administrations. And then upon that approval, we would then be set up to do some things to actually implement that change. We would need to work with both counties to set up one or more sub-regional transportation forums. As we're working to finalize our 2050 RTP, we would need to update our maps. We've already done modeling in this area. They're already part of our model. As we discussed last month, big projects like Floyd Hill and other projects are already in our regional transportation plan. So we've already done that work to formalize that. And then as indicated in the memo, let me scroll back up. One of the things that's actually part of the motion here, and I'll show you the recommended motion, is that we would also need to update our what's known as our metropolitan planning agreement, that we have an actual written agreement to implement the federal requirements for MPO planning between DRCOG, CDOT, and RTD. It describes the MPO and the MPO area, so we would literally need to update the memorandum of agreement for transportation planning and programming, as it's technically known, to account for the expanded description of what would become our expanded MPO boundary. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Alex?
With this proposed change, is it correct that in the past, Clear Creek and Gilpin have not participated in the sub-regional share call for projects through the TIP?
Yeah, that's correct, because not being part of the MPO, they were not eligible for those funds, so they could not participate.
Going forward, they would be eligible if this change is made?
They would be eligible, yes.
Does this change come with any additional funding?
It does not come with additional funding. As we discussed in this committee last month, I was asked the question, well, if they come within the MPO, how does that change the funding distribution, right? Now we've got 2 more counties. What does that look like? So I'll repeat the answer from last month, which is that presuming, and we haven't done like final calculations, you know, because as part of the TIP process, we'll affirm or change our formula, but based on our historic formula for TIP sub-regional share funding, population, employment, and VMT, it would frankly result in a small amount of new funding that they would be eligible for in both counties, and they know it would be small. It would not be significant. For the rest of you in the urban areas, again, without being flippant, it would be a rounding error. It wouldn't be anything that you all would miss. So the idea is that a few dollars, new dollars to them would help them and go a long way for them, but in a way that doesn't disadvantage the rest of the region.
I appreciate this is Justin. I appreciate the stepwise process and the description of what comes next. So it's always interested me, been part of this type of thing before elsewhere, and the fact that it gets up to the governor's office, they make the decision, and everything that comes after that seems like a pretty big lift, but it's a big change as well, arguably. So thank you to DRCOG staff in previous meeting and this one for walking us through it and the presentation we received from. Well, any other comments or questions for Jacob? David.
Yeah, David Kretzinger, City County of Denver. Brody asked a good question last time, and I'm not remembering the answer at this time, which was, does some of the CDOT funding for the transit operations in those counties then carry over to DRCOG to manage?
Yeah, we did talk about that last month, and we think the answer is no. And what I mean by that is that specifically, Brody asked about FTA 5310 funding. That funding is distributed based on urbanized area designations, whether you're a large urbanized area like the Denver Aurora urbanized area, which means we administer, actually Travis administers, or if you're a small urbanized area, Longmont, Louisville, Lafayette, Erie, I believe, maybe a couple others. So those urbanized area designations and the result of how those funds flow, whether DRCOG manages them, CDOT manages them, et cetera, doesn't change by making this geographic change. So in other words, the Denver Aurora urbanized area, under census definition, that boundary does not change or grow. Small urbanized areas remain as small urbanized areas. So as far as we know, there's no change to the distribution or the flow of those dollars.
And then a follow-up question then. So it wouldn't be managed differently, but I want to make sure that Clear Creek and Gilpin also wouldn't lose that funding. They remain rural from that definition, and so would go through CDOT to that funding. Thank you.
Yeah, just in the same way that, again, Longmont, Louisville, Lafayette, who are already part of our MPO, have those same small urban flows for those dollars. Yes.
Jacob. Education question for me, Brody Ayers. Aviation special. See the northwest corner of Boulder County is excluded.
Yep.
Most likely Rocky Mountain National Park. So just for education for me, do all federal lands, are they all excluded from MPO? Or just Rocky Mountain National Park?
It's just Rocky Mountain National Park. You are correct. That little corner is Rocky Mountain National Park. It is excluded from our MPO boundary. But for example, Rocky Mountain Arsenal and the other one. Yeah, Rocky Flats are both within, those designated federal lands that are within the MPO. Rocky Mountain National Park is obviously special and different. That's why it's excluded.
Michelle Riccio, Adams County. Is there any impact to the RTP fiscally constrained planned list of projects?
Yeah, good question. There is not, because we've already essentially accounted for projects in Clear Creek and Gilpin County as we built the plan. And we have a legacy of including those projects like Floyd Hill and like some of the other projects that are already in the regional transportation plan, because they are, again, members of DRCOG and the geography is so close. We've just always already done it. So that's one way that we've already helped kind of prepare for this. We would not have to make any changes to the plan. Alvin, as the manager, I'll defer to you on that, but please feel free to add anything to sort of plan relationship.
I have nothing to add. Thank you. That was perfect.
Chris. One question for you, Jacob. Chris Hudson with the town of Parker. This is a culmination of, this just didn't happen overnight. How long have you been talking to these two counties? Has it been a couple of years, 5 years? Just curious.
Colton, I think it's been close to a year of coordination. Yeah, we've gone up several times. We've had small meetings, big meetings. Between myself and my predecessor and my executive director, we've presented to both county commissions separately and together. We've gone to the city and town councils and presented. Clear Creek County had me out to a commissioners and locals breakfast where I presented. We've had written correspondence. I mean, it's been a lot of work, right? And I don't want to call it work. It's just been collaboration and coordination. Good conversation with those folks that, again, I think has been occurring for about a year or so. It does take a while because we wanted to make very sure before we go to CDOT and the governor that every single community is on board with this change. Whether or not they have the resources or the interest in participating in the MPO at this time, we wanted to make sure that every single community that we could represent to CDOT and the governor, that every single community would support or at least not oppose the notion of making this change to adding the geography of both counties to the MPO. And that's where we're at, which is why we're bringing it forward now.
Any other follow-ups or clarifications, questions for Jacob? Okay, do we have a motion for the recommendation of this item? Tom?
Homeworker Brock, Arapahoe County, City of Aurora, so moved.
Second.
Bruno, second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, signify by saying no. Abstentions? Thank you. I think that is our last action item. So moving further into the agenda, we're moving into informational briefings. C1, it is the 2029 to 2032 Transportation Improvement Program Policy Document Amendment Update. That's attachment G. Got Aaron Belair and I see Todd as well up there?
Yeah, I'm not on there.
Okay.
I'm just here to introduce Aaron and sort of level set the topic and where we're at and where we're heading. So thank you, Mr. Chair. For the last couple of months, we've had discussions about amending the current TIP policy document to essentially go for the 29 to 32 TIP call for projects, which will start next year. And again, we've had some conversations, but we're starting to get a little bit into the depths here. Today's conversation is going to focus in on active transportation and a few ideas that we have had from staff to enhance the TIP policy itself. So I will turn it over to Aaron, let him go into a little detail. I think the final reminder I would say is we're not looking for action today. We're looking for your basic head nod or not to eventually put this within the new document that we're creating. So thank you.
Right, and thank you. Yeah, so just to build on that, so I am, of course, Aaron Villery. I'm the Senior Active Transportation Planner, and because we want this to be kind of discussion oriented, and we have a lot on our plate for today. So we've got this broken into 3 modules. So I'm going to talk about 3 things, and then we'll break for discussion within each of those, if that's all right. And I would really just love to gather feedback today to kind of stress test some of these initial ideas and start to think this through. As Todd mentioned, we're digging into the weeds on a pretty long or an ongoing process. So really just excited to hear y'all's feedback. So the 3 areas we'll talk about are a proposed active transportation count requirement associated with TIP projects. The second part is routine provision of accessible travel routes, which is to say where our sidewalks and active transportation facilities required, and then a pre-application walk audit requirement. So we'll talk about each of those in turn. Just to kind of anchor this, I'm not going to go through each of these, but these are sort of the most relevant MetroVision performance measures, and that's really what we're kind of in service of is achieving our goals around safety and getting to regional vision 0, our goals around mode shift and single occupant vehicle travel options and mode share, congestion, vehicle miles traveled throughout the region. So that's really what's motivating our thinking around this. So we'll start with counts. So one of the things that we sort of consistently run into, I would say, or have run into is that projects are implemented, the ribbon gets cut, it's very exciting, and then it's harder to follow up and actually benchmark that project afterwards, after to actually quantify the impact. So what we're really thinking about is how can we routinize quantifying the impact of projects? How can we support that storytelling and continue to build momentum around active transportation? How can we make sure that we're telling the story of this investment led to this activity? And then how can we support telling a regional story? How can we benchmark trends over time? How can we enhance our travel modeling and estimation work? We're doing some exciting work this year through around thinking about how do we better model bicycle activity, and so on the active transportation, how do we measure it so that we can continue to manage it? So the place that we're starting is we're interested in having a requirement in the TIP policy that any TIP-funded construction project would be required to collect and submit Bicycle Plus, and by Bicycle Plus, I'll get into that in a second, and pedestrian counts to DRCOG after the project is open, containing these core facility types. So newer enhanced sidewalks, shared use paths, separated bike lanes, on-street bicycle lanes, or bicycle boulevards. So if one of these project design elements is in your project and is constructed, we would like to support you in collecting after counts. And then we want to put together some basic criteria of just what do those counts look like to be supportive and valid. So best practice is to count for 2 weeks, so at least 14 days, and waiting about 4 to 6 months after a project opens to the public, so that the project can settle in, that people get used to the facility, they know it's there, it becomes part of the regular travel routine. We'd like those projects to differentiate between Bicycle Plus and pedestrian users. Bicycle Plus encompassing bikes, scooters, e-bikes, all those things. You don't have to differentiate within that frame. But we want to know who are on small vehicles, small wheeled vehicles that are generally human powered versus who are people walking accessibility devices. So those are the two buckets. And because of the sort of need to let the project settle in, this would most likely not be included within the IGA for each project. This would essentially have to be an agreement that would be between project sponsors and DRCOG. And then some of the shading on that, it can be conducted by the local jurisdiction. If you have count equipment, you can certainly do that. You can contract with a vendor who conducts active transportation counts, or you can partner directly with DRCOG. As I'll take the moment to remind you that DRCOG does have mobile bicycle and pedestrian count equipment that can be deployed in certain contexts, and we are happy to support that our members. And the project scope may include permanent count equipment, and if it does so, then that would certainly satisfy this. But the key goal for us is to incorporate count after projects and to have a robust count data set that goes beyond annual counts. So with that, I will pause, and I would love to open the floor to discussion or questions around the idea of routinized data collection.
Hi, Jessica Mickelbust, CDOT. I'm curious on the statement, if containing the following facility types. So is this if you touch a sidewalk, you report on the sidewalk, or is there a length of new or enhanced sidewalks or shared use paths that you're constructing that kicks you into this requirement? And if you haven't thought that far ahead, I might suggest putting some parameters around clarifying what that might mean.
Sort of a minimum project length that triggers it. That's a great question. Is there like a length that, say, like a block or like 600 feet? Or I'll just kind of put that question back.
Probably worth discussing, but block to block, corner to corner, ADA ramp to ADA ramp or something. Just if you're going to make the investment to monitor, I don't know how you would monitor something less than that. In fact, it could be even greater than that. Maybe it's like a quarter mile, which would be your walkable distance from a transit facility or something.
Jessica, are you, just to clarify your question, are you asking about the length or the magnitude of the facility itself being funded through the TIP project, and or are you asking about other of these types of facilities that the project would touch and the responsibility, sort of facilities that it touches?
Yeah, so you're required to collect and submit counts, right, to DRCOG after the project is open to the public if containing the following facility types. So new or enhanced sidewalk, like what's the length of, what triggers you to have to require to collect the data? Does that make sense? Okay.
And I am hesitating to like propose an answer because I kind of want to collect committee feedback, but I do think that part of the reason that we're choosing linear opposed to like a, you know, if you rebuild curb ramps or a signal, like I think that's sort of a different category, and it wouldn't make as much in that situation. But that said, I think we're being prescriptive about that sort of length or that trigger.
Okay, just throwing that out there for consideration. And I also would recommend that this is not included in the IGA with CDOT. Our IGAs are already challenging enough for our local agencies to navigate the process and execute through our attorneys, and adding another kind of layer of involvement or layer of requirement. I'm maybe speaking on behalf of our local agencies. I see some head nods. I would just, if you can, not link those two items together, that probably would be beneficial.
Yes, and I've already had some previous conversations with Region 1 local agency staff, and that was their recommendation too, was to not put this within your IGA. They did not see a need to hold up any project closeouts. There's a whole bunch of reasons why not to do that. So this would be something essentially off the top And yes, there would need to be sort of, and I don't want to say agreement because it doesn't have to necessarily be in writing, but there needs to be an understanding between that project sponsor and DRCOG that those counts would be conducted within that 4 to 6 month time frame.
Roloff, Clear Creek County. Is there any desire, especially on improvements to sidewalks, to require a baseline for the project? Because otherwise, you can't really prove increased pedestrian use if you don't have any data beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's my understanding that that before counts are required for have been required for TIP applications in the past.
No, that's 100%. Sorry, I won't do that again. I won't touch it. Yes, within the TIP application, there is a requirement to fill in existing count information. So that information should be gathered as part of the application process.
Thank you.
Yeah, and something that maybe I neglected to mention was what's been required in past TIP applications is a before count and then an estimation of what the after count might be. And one of the advantages here is we'd like to sort of strengthen the tools that we have to help agencies develop that after estimate. We think just having more before and after data to understand how facilities actually performed can support sort of that future modeling work and project estimation.
Aaron, just a couple thoughts from me, Justin Begley. First of all, I'd say like this is on its face very good. It's harder to implement, right, for sponsors, but I think data collection and a post look back, right, like where a lot of us are in the business of securing funding and delivering projects and moving on. And so the planner in me likes this a lot. Key to this is the at least 4 to 6 months, right? Accounting, you know, I don't know that that's, I think we have to look at like different scenarios where that might make sense, but generally you need 12 months. But it really depends on when you're implementing a project too. You're building something in construction season in summer and 4 to 6 months later, you may not see much utilization depending on what season you're in. So maintaining a minimum versus setting a fixed amount of time for that count collection or range, you know, X to X months would be good. And we tried this in Denver. I mean, we do it now. We're trying to stand up more evaluation as part of our work, right? Put something out there. Did it achieve what we thought it would, right? And that's going to inform how we projects in the future. So, I mean, ensuring however this information is used, there's enough context in the post-evaluation collection of data to accurately frame whether if we saw what we expected or saw some difference. It's tied back to get down to the level of design decisions that were made, you know, as well. And yeah, just the final comment from me is just the framework of thinking change around delivering projects at the sponsor level and knowing you need to come back, right? Yeah. Come back to that project and do those counts. And I would just leave with a question, you know, does this, you know, how do you envision at least, you know, 1 or 2 examples of how you might use that data? Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'm realizing as I'm looking at this now, to your first question, this could have been better worded. I think when we say at least 4 to 6 months, that's sort of the latency period before we would want to expect for that. I think I gamed it out and need basically to land in like a summer season, like a summer month, you probably need a window of 12 months where you'd want to collect those. Do so within a pretty immediate time following the project, but also sort of that time to be open and service. In terms of applications, it's a great question. And a couple things just right off the top. We're working with the City and County of Denver and City of Boulder right now on piloting a like data fusion model. And a huge part of that is just going to be collecting a lot of counts. We sort of see this as an opportunity to really understand, like, what are some of the different contextual factors that really drive ridership, and how can we develop better tools for modeling that. So just having more collected counts is really huge to improving the robustness of our travel model and sort of any analysis activities we do, benchmarking year-over-year trends. The challenge that we run into is that we do have access to a lot of data, and it's often hard to find signal within having more count sites and more continuous. We see this as going directly into our count database that people currently contribute to, that we try to aggregate for the region. So just getting a better window of how things are changing over time, the impact of different types of facilities and different types of projects, continue our planning and our implementation. And then telling the story about successes. I think that's such a huge part that's really hard to make that time for is, project, it was successful, and how do we talk about it and how do we build on that?
Aaron, I think you touched on this before, but could you clarify DRCOG's role in helping jurisdictions collect counts for those that are understaffed or small jurisdiction or otherwise maybe not have the resources to go out and collect counts directly?
Absolutely, and file this away that we do have mobile count equipment, and when we say we can provide you with assistance, if you call me or email me and say that you have a site that you would like counts collected at, I can help you do that. Just as a member service, I can go out and put counters in the field, and it's usually nice to do in the summer because it's sunny, and I like being outside. But we do have bike and pedestrian count equipment that is a combined infrared and tube counter, so we can actually differentiate modes, and we can put those out for 2 weeks at no cost to member governments. And we would love to partner with you on that. So that hopefully kind of defrays the ask a little bit. Have some count equipment, we have resources that we're ready to dedicate to supporting you all.
Michelle.
Michelle Riccio, Adams County. Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate you also just kind of clarifying what you have available at DRCOG too, because that was one of my 2 questions was like, what does partnership mean for those that are either understaffed or staffed or under-resourced? And then my second kind of comment was for those corridors that are really long, I think having some parameters about spacing would be helpful, just to give some context around what the expectation is at the onset of even like the tip out.
Absolutely. Kind of a good bookend to comment as well.
Brody and then Zeke.
Sure. Thanks, Brody. Aaron, the question is really around with the assets you have today to be able to do counts, what level would you have to scale up to be able to meet the demand? So if you could just cover this in-house as a way of something DRCOG does, benefit CMAQ, it could benefit models, all these different things could come out of it as benefits, but how do you see this as it not scalable, I guess, within?
Yeah, there is a limit on sort of equipment and staff time, so we currently have 6 counters, so we could deploy 6 simultaneously around. And, there's a staff time limit of DRCOG staff out doing this. It's something that could be scaled up in the future as funding is identified to either hear more counts, to go through vendors, to potentially purchase more equipment. Right now, we kind of did that on not a pilot basis, but just kind of to explore capacity and what it would take to have our mobile count equipment and to be able to be flexible in doing that. And I've not found the top of our capacity yet. So it's a great question for the future to be able to do this more systematically throughout the region. I think the ultimate vision is to have more counters for the region and to support governments and agencies and as data collection. But for now, I think we really want to start with let's just make sure we're getting good benchmarks from our TIP projects.
Be good for your mental health to have consistent.
Thank you, Vice Chair Zeke Lynch, Douglas County. I appreciate your comment earlier about seasonality too. I think it's important that this kind of post-implementation evaluation we look at is realistic about how the facilities are being used, and not maybe scheduling it during the 2 weeks at Bike to Work Day and seeing a real huge spike in usage. And you know, the other thing I would add is, you know, it's a bit of a field of dreams proposition here, and a lot of, you know, every agency in this room probably has segments of cow paths or goat tracks or whatever you want to call them, where people are already walking. So simply looking, in my opinion, simply looking at just the data, the change in the count, wouldn't be necessarily adequate, because you might have the same number of people wanting to use the same segment of missing sidewalk. But what we're really quantifying as part of this is we're quantifying safety, we're quantifying their level of comfort, we're quantifying their experience that they're having on these new facilities. So I think it's more than the count data. We need to be reflective of how these projects are really affecting people's experience on our roadways.
Small benchmark.
One more thought that came up, Jessica Mickelbust, CDOT. So, and I don't know the answer to this, but might be good to look into. So this is construction funding, and if the agency has spent their funding on building the project and they need to invest in this post-construction effort, I guess we'd want to make sure, if they were thinking they would use construction funding to pay for this monitoring, if it's eligible, if this type of activity is eligible for construction funding, and then if it's not, making sure we clarify with the applicants that they need to tap into their own pot of money, which sometimes is challenging because it's a post-construction and we don't have the money for this activity. So just maybe thinking through like how that would kind of impact the fiscal constraints of the project.
And that's where I wanted to have that pre-conversation with Region 1 staff about your IGAs. And I think what we're proposing here is something that you would have to consider either using local funds on very minimal amount, or like Aaron mentioned, working with DRCOG staff to be able to do this, because this is not going to be part of your federal aid project. This is going to be 100% sort of off the shelf, different than your project, but would still carry the same weight within our TIP policy, as we would like that information back. So there's an expectation that these counts would be collected, you know, in a reasonable time frame.
Tom Worker, Arapahoe County, City of Aurora. Building on several earlier comments, extending the timeline for count eligibility out to 18 months, I think would capture both the time frame needed for people being aware that the facility is there, as well as having the option for optimizing the seasonality of the counts. Although apparently March would be fine, so.
Right? I appreciate the comment. Yeah, I may move into the next section, because I think that this will be a fun conversation too. So, minimum facility standards and provision. And so this really gets into a lot of feedback. So we just finished the actual transportation plan that was adopted in January. And really want to build on what was in that plan, and kind of think through how we can really institutionalize implementation of the plan. So some of the things that we heard during that plan, during our engagement, with new micromobility vehicle types are placing increasing demands on sidewalks and bikeways. Local governments have difficulty funding and delivering consistent and comfortable sidewalks. And then there's a significant backlog of accessible coverage to meet the growing region, which is to say we did a pretty cursory analysis, but we think about roughly about half the regional roadway system is ADA compliant sidewalks. So the intent for this proposed requirement is really to just think about how can we unlock more TIP funding for a complete and continuous active transportation network. How can we really emphasize accessibility and comfort and support implementation of local ADA transition plans, local active transportation, try to comply with new design standards and requirements and also best practices, and then ultimately accelerating progress towards MetroVision. And just to pin what's in the active transportation plan, one of our plan actions is updating the TIP policy to include minimum active transportation facility standards and guidance that builds on the regional, which set out some modal priorities on different street types throughout the region. Some of the sort of sub-actions within that overarching action are setting minimum facility guidelines consistent with PROAG and accommodate future capacity and user needs, developing tools to assist TIP project sponsors with implementing and specifically with practice facilities, and then encouraging implementation of best practices on TIP-supported projects. And so we really are thinking about, something that I've heard this committee say is that the TIP has really gone from capacity projects to including, just sort of as a matter of process, active transportation facilities. And so we really want to build on that momentum. Thinking about how can we best continue support and make sure that we're completing, especially an accessible network, but also a network that meets our goals for active transportation and for transportation options throughout the region. And so to kind of start at the highest level, one of the things that we're considering and wanted to gather feedback on is a requirement to have all TIP-supported infrastructure projects provide basic accessibility on both sides of the roadway. And then I've put in some sort of carve-outs or exceptions, acknowledging that this is a large region with really varied effects. So there would probably be some sort of carve-outs within that requirement that, like, rural or mountain roads as defined in the complete street typology would likely be exempted, would potentially only need a facility on one side of the street, or really, depends, but those without pedestrian generators, so and with more geological constraints. So thinking about that, places where there are not current or planned pedestrian activity generators on one side of the street, streets abutting topographical barriers, or limited access highways, things like that. And so we're kind of thinking through about what are those situations that where this accessibility requirement maybe doesn't quite fit, but really thinking about how do you provide a basic level of pedestrian mobility and service on both sides of the street. And then when it comes to shared use facilities, this is the only dimension that I'll put forward today, which is that requiring that all TIP supported projects meet a minimum criteria where shared use between bicycle plus vehicles and pedestrians is indicated. So if a side path or a shared use path is indicated as being both bike and pedestrian, that we'd want to see a minimum of 10 feet or wider. And this is to sort of get at what is the standard right now, best practice in sort of CDOT design manuals in AASHTO and sort of national, with a note that minimum width exceptions for things like right-of-way issues be reviewed case based, kind of setting this foundation or this floor for minimum facilities. We put together a couple scenarios just to try to make it real. So a proposed project might be a capacity project, which includes widening from 4 to 6 lanes, and the shared use path is proposed for one side. So the requirement that would be put forward would be a continuous and PROAG compliant sidewalk on both sides of the street, and then the shared use path side would need to be 10 feet wide. And then there could be sort of a preferred facility subsection that, consistent with the Regional Complete Streets Toolkit and the sidewalk delivery guide that we developed, sidewalks would be recommended to be 6 to 8 feet and detached to serve bidirectional walking, and shared use path width might be increased if anticipated demand is high. But that would be sort of a preferred rather than a requirement. And then one last thing that we were thinking about is if you have a situation where redevelopment is reasonably expected or is committed on one side of the street, that you can sort of demonstrate that there is a sidewalk coming, but it's going to be constructed with private funding, that could satisfy this requirement. And it could be outside of the TIP scope, but it would still meet the another project, which is kind of a different flavor, but if you had an operational improvement that was aiming to reconstruct intersections, install medians and restripe the roadway, so there's maybe more spot improvements and less consideration for sort of linear art infrastructure. The requirement would be that the curb ramps in the intersection itself would need to be PRO-AG compliant, but that we would want to be mindful of where do we trigger a larger requirement. So where sidewalks are modified, they would need to be PRO-AG compliant, but it might not necessarily trigger an corridor requirement. So with that, I would love to open it up to conversation. Specifically around like scenarios or challenges to consider with these policy proposals, opportunities, things that we might not be thinking about.
Aaron, this is Justin Begley. So this section is called Minimum Facility Standards and Provision. But I should confirm, is this specific just to pedestrian pathways, sidewalks, active transportation? I mean, how generalized should we take this overview?
Yeah, so it would apply to not just that. I think that's the core of it. Is it's not just active transportation or mobile projects. It would be essentially any project of any primary project type that we would want to see a basic level of active transportation access and level of service. Of course, with context consideration, but to sort of routinize, where do we have pedestrian facilities?
And so the Regional Complete Streets Toolkit would become the new floor minimum standards for any TIP project that had meet certain criteria.
I would say that PRO-AG would be the floor because the Regional Complete Streets Toolkit doesn't actually specify dimensions.
So it'll point you to these standards. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Right.
So that it sort of refers you to guidance, and then the standard is really, it just needs basic level of access.
Curious to hear what folks think about this one. Thank you.
And the one thing I may add is that these are standards that, I'm no engineer, so don't quote me on any of this, but you should already be building to these standards right now as it is. So in theory, this is not a huge lift, I don't think, from your perspective. And again, please correct me if that's wrong. But I think this is more or less putting in writing to say, here's the floor of what our expectation would be for all TIP-funded active transportation components.
Chris Hudson, Town Parker. Just curious, I mean, this is you're asking us to digest something today that's going to take some time. Your policy is coming up fairly quickly. And I know people don't like, heard earlier, pilots. We want to try and pilot this in the next TIP cycle to see what the pluses and minuses of it are. Data for the sake of data, I struggle with. I want to see what we test drive this on a certain percentage of the next TIP cycle projects. See what the benefits are of this information that we're doing. It's just my opinion right now. It's a lot to take in, and the TIP itself is a very complex document. So we're adding another layer that we all have to digest. And I'm just curious if you guys have thought about a pilot of sorts in this next TIP cycle or some select projects.
Honestly, I mean, that's a good question. I think the unknown for me right now, and maybe probably Aaron too, is we don't know the exact reach and the exact change that will have to be made by individual projects. Because again, there's a natural assumption that some of these items are being met. Obviously, the first item with the counts, that's sort of a little bit different. With this item, I think the big question and the potential big lift is we're trying to up the standard for these projects to a certain level that in theory should already be met. And one of the bigger lifts is adding a potential sidewalk or a path on the opposite end if you're only thinking about building on one side versus two. I don't really know how to answer that question because I think there's multiple steps to thinking through that at first. Sorry. I'm trying to think through all the ramifications of what that would mean. I would essentially be waiting a whole nother tip cycle to implement something like this. So I'll go from there.
You got Tom and then Gene, yes.
Generally, this sounds like a great idea, and something that, you know, I think governments would already be expected to do. My one concern is sort of specifying the width of the sidewalk. I know 6 feet wide is wider than the City of Aurora standards for local streets, and there's a lot of, you know, active transportation funding that DRCOG distributes where local streets might be applicable or might be eligible because they're an active transportation project, not necessarily a roadway capacity project or a roadway project, you know. And so there might be challenges in sort of implementing these new wider sidewalk designs in neighborhoods that were built, you know, current to today's city specifications, but then because we're doing a TIP project, you know, have to look at widening sidewalks, and that has real implications on Betty's flowers, you know, and things of that nature.
I just wanted to add for a little context, and this is not about sidewalks, but this is multi-use paths in terms of TIP policy. So going back about 20 years ago, the minimum width for a TIP project was 8 feet. 5, 6 years maybe after that, so about 15 years ago, that did go up to 10 feet minimum width for, again, multi-use path only. Probably 6 to 7 years ago, that was dropped. There was no minimum requirement at all. So again, things have changed over time, but I just wanted to provide that for a little bit of context.
The thing that and I think that's kind of what we want to identify is like, what are those things where you might trigger a requirement in a project scope at ahead of the externalities there. One thing that I will note is so the PROAG, the general minimum requirement for, you know, like a pedestrian access route is 48 inches with an expansion to 60 inches at a regular interval for pass one another. So in practice, like 5 feet is kind of the base width because of that passing route. When we say 6 to 8 feet, you know, we're specifically thinking of not as much on local streets and more of what's on the regional roadway system to really get that arterial or major collector or higher. It's also at this point, I don't quite know if we're ready to say like the standard on every street is 6 to 8 feet, you know, and so we're kind of stress testing that a little bit with you all. But it is good to flag those specific considerations that active transportation projects are not necessarily on the regional roadway system. There's sort of a different set of criteria to evaluate. So I appreciate it.
Jean?
Thanks for this information. A couple questions. So I understand the concept of wanting to ensure that TIP-funded projects incorporate safe and comfortable pedestrian infrastructure, like on both sides. That, you know, that makes sense, and that there's a certain, you know, set of standards. But with that said, it seems to me that there's this assumption that, well, we're all trying to do this anyway, right? We might not be able to meet the standards because of right-of-way or flowers or whatever it might be, and now we're creating this extra level of review and criteria. And so I guess I'm just not sure that this actually meets what we're trying to achieve here. When I look at the intent to unlock TIP funding for an active transportation network, we can use TIP funding for an active transportation. I mean, I don't think it's locked now, is it?
No.
Right. And then the slide before about local governments experiencing funding difficulty delivering it. Again, that's a money issue, not a standards issue. And so what I'm hearing from this conversation is perhaps it might be worthwhile to simply survey local governments that have been constructing TIP-funded projects to see if this is or is not the case before coming back to this. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I do think it's worth it to kind of continue the engagement. I think this is sort of an opening to the conversation. Go back, and I think the thing that I'm thinking about when I say unlock TIP funding is like if you go sort of call by call, like the amount that's gone to active transportation projects really is like pretty remarkable. That just the amount of investment, like one of the most like exciting things that we can really hang our hat on, or certainly that I can in my role, that I can cheerlead and be excited about. But that said, it's sort of this opportunity of because there is such a large backlog of streets that sort of level of upgrade to meet that level of compliance. How can we do more, not passively, but sort of as a matter of protocol to integrate accessible, make sure that those streets that are often the barriers in the active transportation on the regional road system really are accommodating that level. I think that's kind of the place that I'm coming. Changing the TIP policy doesn't unlock necessarily, but it's sort of like what are the basic requirements and those scopes that we completing the system and not an opportunity, I guess, if that makes sense.
It does to a certain extent, but I would argue that just as important as accessible sidewalks along a roadway are crossings, because that's oftentimes as much, if not more, the deterrent.
That is something I'm getting my head around. But yeah, we've been continuing to do some of that analysis, and I would love to kind of continue the conversation about how to incorporate.
Jessica Mickelbus, CDOT. Really good dialogue, and I think just building on some of the things other folks have said, I would say, at least in our Region 1 network with our 56 plus local agencies, I haven't run into any who are not wanting to be more proactive and aggressive in their incorporation of multimodal accommodation and safety. I think to Chris's point earlier, in the TIP process, you can apply for planning, design, or construction. And so if, there's a community that has a project that's going to construction and now they have to meet this criteria of 10-foot sidewalks and there's a right-of-way constraint that really is challenging even to get to maybe the 8-foot sidewalk, that is a cost constraint, that is a time constraint to go through the right-of-way acquisition process. So just some of the things, maybe we think about doing this for the planning process for the next call. That way you're catching those projects earlier in the queue so that they can build in the appropriate design money, right-of-way acquisition, and whatever other, technical constraints might be kind of in the way for those projects. I think coming in at the construction timeframe, and I'm guessing, but I think it would be unlikely that you would see a project, at least in our local agencies, where someone's going to widen the road from 4 to 6 lanes and not have any sidewalk or multimodal or trail accommodation. I feel like we've all been really progressive at trying to work there. We're not where we want to be, but I don't know if you'd see any with zero accommodation unless it's a rural road, you know, going to Golden State Park or something. So just some things to think about, maybe what phase you want to include this in. Is it across the board, planning, design, construction, or maybe we just do not a pilot, but we just say, hey, we're going to start with our new planning projects, then there'll be design next call, then there'll be construction, or as they kind of move through, that might give some opportunity to help address the concerns of the time it takes to incorporate some of these additional things. I also would want to be careful that we don't lose safety components that may not be directly sidewalk or path related, because we're trying to fund the sidewalk and the path, but then we miss the other safety component, whether it's a hawk signal or something else that was built into the project that now has to be removed to make the sidewalk, to get the points, to get the funds. So just some things to think about as you're looking at that application period, because it is close and people do spend a lot of time really thinking about the projects and the queue that they want to submit those. So just a couple ideas.
David Kretzinger, City and County of Denver. Aaron, you may be aware that a lot of the BRT projects have been having this ongoing conversation about extensive construction and things like that. So let's just take a example corridor that's got third mile spacing of bus stops. The actual construction then is only occurring on every third block. And you're not disrupting the other 2 blocks in between, because the bus rapid transit is a striping effort within the curb line. And so does it provoke that the project then also has to do sidewalk upgrades for the 2 blocks that it's not touching?
It is a consideration. No, absolutely. I'll just flag that. I think that's kind of why we want to have the conversation, you know, the things, you know, that this could impact project scopes. So.
We'll do one more and then move along, because you have one more item in here.
All right, I'll keep this one short. I agree with everyone's kind of broader general statements. I think for the first, the rural versus mountain road bullet point, I think one thing to point out is at the local level, at least for Adams County, we also have our own definition of rural roads. So if we're applying definitions, if there's flexibility between DRCOG complete street typology and also how Adams County's functional class is defining roadways, that would be a helpful ability. They should be mostly similar.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I appreciate the comment, and I do think that Alvin, you can grab the hook and pull me off the stage if you need to, but I believe that the regional complete street typology might be good after the RTP is completed. Is that?
Cut out a little bit there, but I think you said updated after the current RTP?
Correct.
Yeah, so we haven't been as proactive in the cycle amendments we wanted for that typology and the Complete Streets Toolkit, but we have been evaluating updating that network in the next year or 2.
Yeah, so just raising that as an opportunity to kind of, you know, conflate the local networks and the regional networks so that everything matches. But I will press on, and luckily the third one I think I can get through. Please, so a required application of conducting a walk audit. And so just to kind of run through this, so the intent of this requirement would be to save project time and budget and improve outcomes during delivery. That applicants would be required to conduct a basic walk audit. And what we mean by this is literally walking the corridor with a clipboard and maybe a schematic drawing or roll plot to identify basic infrastructure deficiencies and right-of-way issues early in the process to avert later delays and cost increases, to help refine project needs and goals through simple inventory. And this would apply to design and construction projects if you're going to do a study. For instance, we wouldn't see this as relevant, but it would essentially be a pass-fail. It would be just walking the corridor to identify a list of common elements. Are there deficient curb ramps? Are there missing or non-compliant sidewalks? Where are the existing crosswalks and traffic signals and those types of structure? where's lighting infrastructure, accessible transit stops and transit paths, the kinds of things that are helpful to include in a project scope, but you know, often you don't see the most current version of Google Street View or most recent, you know, aerial imagery. So just having that, just taking that time to walk a corridor and then to submit a pass-fail diagram. Want to be clear when we say walk audit, this does not mean a road safety audit. This does not mean something that requires a vendor or a consultant. It would ideally be conducted by staff, and it would take, you know, the amount of time that it takes to walk the corridor and make the notes, that it might be based on an existing template. We've provided a couple examples or referred to a couple examples. And essentially what you would be required to submit is a diagram of your walk audit, just to sort of show completion of it and to show what you identified. Any deficiencies or things that you identify on the diagram do not necessarily need to be in your project scope, but we just want to sort of see the work that was done. So with that, and
I just wanted to maybe simplify what Aaron was saying, and I don't want to say dumb it down, but sort of put it at a different level. I've seen a lot of different TIP projects over the years, and sometimes the little mistakes that you didn't think were mistakes, those are the ones that cost you a year, 2 years in time and cost $1 million. All we're trying to do is get people out in the field that actually look at the project. Take 2 hours with an engineer, go out in the field, list all the deficiencies so that you're aware of what's currently on the ground. I know it sounds relatively simple. We think it's relatively simple. What we're ultimately trying to do, and this sort of relates back to this entire TIP process for this 4-year upcoming cycle, is to, you know, try to avoid as many of the issues. Go through your pre-construction elements. Think about all of these things ahead of time. The application that you will eventually fill out should be the very last thing that you do to be able to ask for funds. And so again, this is just part of that process to make everyone aware of what's actually out there.
That we will open for discussion.
Justin Begley. So first item you presented, post-implementation counts. This item, post-implementation as well, correct?
This would be pre-application.
Pre-application. So I think I don't have a specific comment on this. It's more of just a global comment, and I think you all are aware of this coming into this conversation. It's I'll give you an example. In Denver, we have our own kind of like minimum thresholds to look at for whether it makes sense for us to federalize a project, go after federal funds. So I'm not characterizing these proposed changes. I think these are good changes, but there are tipping points by which we will say, like, are we willing to undertake all the work and strings that the feds attach and other things in order to pursue a project, right? Or attaching a certain funding type to a project. So my comment is simply, thank you for bringing these proposed changes for conversation, and then also understand the perspective of the sponsor that, you know, there are decisions sponsors need to make about like whether we're both capable and willing to undertake how much can we reasonably accomplish and do well with a project. Again, I don't think these things rise to, these are good practices, right? I don't think these are that, but I would just say, you know, continue to survey, I think was brought up earlier. I think that's a great idea. Continue this conversation outside of this meeting to dial in the level of effort needed to implement these projects and whether it continues to be something sponsors can deliver, or does it start to have us reconsider submitting a project because we don't know that it's a good fit for.
Zeke Lynch, Douglas County again. Hey, thanks for the presentation, Aaron. I guess specific to this kind of walk audit discussion, I think it should be just best practice for all of us to simply just be doing that. I think that's kind of what you're saying. what might be helpful, because it's a pre-application, is, Todd, you mentioned DRCOG sees a lot of these pitfalls, right, of projects that have been delayed because of some oversight through the pre-application process, or they found out something, mid-design or mid-planning that they didn't anticipate because they didn't maybe walk the site the way they should. That information, I think, could be really helpful to your member governments that, if you could put a list together to say, hey, if you see these challenges, as you're conducting your walk audits, keep an eye out for these things because they have the potential to submarine your project. I think that could be really helpful to us.
Yeah. And actually, I think this general concept came from, looking at some of the items we've seen in the past and trying to identify those in the readiness section of the previous application. And then this is actually a practice that another MPO in the state has taken on and they've seen success from. So yes, I think we could probably take it to the next step and start listing out some of those common things that we've seen and just more things to watch out for if you conduct a walk audit.
This is more of a general comment as well, not specifically related to the walk audit. This is Kira Moore from the RAC. But we're just interested in aligning the updates to this policy document with some of the key air quality planning deadlines and activities that fall within the same time frame. So that includes the next ozone state implementation plan and the RAC board endorsed control strategy blueprint that's supporting preparation of that plan between now and 2030. So we would encourage DRCOG to place a high value on TIP-funded projects that minimize emissions growth and even better, achieve substantial emission reductions. And we'd welcome discussions with DRCOG, including through the subcommittee and the TAC about how to coordinate and collaborate around air quality goals and tracking that kind of impact through the TIP process as it moves along. So thanks.
If there's anything else, certainly feel free to follow up with me. There's my contact information. I'm always happy to continue the conversation, but appreciate the feedback today on these initial items.
And I just want to put a final sort of capstone on this. This was a brainstorming conversation. You can't react to something if we don't put it out there for you to react to. So we did, and you did, and we really appreciated the conversation today. This is about idea generation and brainstorming and about working together. So really, really appreciated the feedback and the very good questions and the things for us to consider and to go back and think about, and we will do that. That's exactly what we were looking for. We were not afraid of this conversation. This is actually the kind of conversation we wanted to have, and we wanted to have this kind of on the ground floor now and start bringing you sort of ideas and brainstorming so that we can work together to eventually take some of these or hopefully most of these into a formal proposal later. But we wanted to have this kind of conversation today and really appreciate the sort of candid but kind of constructive dialogue that we had. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Aaron and Todd. Just noting, we have no informational items on the agenda. Concluding that section of the agenda, and then just moving into the final area of administrative items. Announcements from DRCOG staff for the good of the order.
So we do have a couple, or just one announcement and one comment. The first, everyone who's seen the agenda cover page should note that the April TAC meeting is being rescheduled. It will be 1 week earlier on April 20th to not conflict with the Colorado Transportation Symposium. So based on survey results and the conversations that we need to continue to have on the TIP, we're looking to continue to have both an April and a May TAC meeting, but both of those are being rescheduled. And so you will see that calendar invite update following this afternoon. And then a thank you to everyone for getting through a number of hiccups we've had with the TAC meetings. For those who came in early enough, you saw us using the wrong meeting ID. We did not send the packet out to all alternates, only members. So as we work through the transition with the new division assistant, do appreciate your patience with those hiccups. They will continue to fall off as we figure out this process. So thank y'all.
What Alvin meant to say is Cam Kennedy is irreplaceable, but boy, we're trying.
I think we were looking for Cam today, earlier in Denver.
You got me instead.
Yes.
Sorry.
So any other announcements from the members or alternates for TAC for this committee? Okay. So next meeting, just a reminder, if you haven't signed in, please do so. If you came in late, maybe the sheet might have passed you by, but thanks for your participation today. There's a lot on this agenda. Fun day to assume the chair seat. The next TAC meeting is going to be Monday, April 20th, 2026, and we're now adjourned at 3:26 p.m. Thank you.